How's it hangin', mashin' bangin'? I am and this is I Played a Thing, Space Harrier and Friends. Last time we looked at a couple of strange little side roads to the Harrier saga, but today we'll be getting back onto the main drag with one of the proper sequels. On our hit list today is Space Harrier 3D, released for the Master System in 1988. Yes, that is 3D, not 30, much as I'd be perfectly happy to see the Space Harrier series climb as high as 30. Space Harrier 3D was one of a handful of games for the rather nice but undersupported Sega 3D glasses, also known as the Segascope glasses. Unlike the red and blue type glasses packed in with a handful of NES games like Rad Racer, the Sega 3D glasses were a retail peripheral. I'm not sure of the exact price, though I believe I dropped about $30 on mine. This may sound extortionate, but they were pretty damn neat for their day, using a powered LCD shutter system to produce a strong illusion of depth. So functionality was great, but the specs had two major drawbacks. The first was that only 8 SMS games were actually supported by them, so there just wasn't much to play in 3D. Second, they cut the frame rate in half, which may have been a contributing factor in this particular game's fatal flaw. More on that when we get to it. So, where does Space Harrier 3D fit into the Harrier saga? That's actually kind of a hairy question. First, as with before, let's look at the box copy. The Intergalactic Warrior Space Harrier returns in an all-new 3D adventure. The peaceful land of the dragons is again under attack. Evil creatures fill the land and sky. Oriya, brief digression here, sometimes the name appears as Urea with an EU like that, but I'm sticking with Oriya because it's the original and most common spelling, and I still suspect it's an Uriah Heep reference. Anyway, Oriya the Magnificent White Dragon is being held prisoner in a diabolical trap. Only you, the Space Harrier, can set him free, but this time the challenge is greater than ever before, etc., etc. Oh, and a word of acknowledgement, I forgot to mention it in the first episode, but these box and manual scans come from SegaRetro.org, a most excellent resource for all things Sega historical. So, alright, that's well and good. Now, how about the manual? This is kind of a wall of text, so I won't read it all. Pause the video if you need to. But in summary, Harrier saved Dragonland in the first game. The Dragon King died, Oriya was supposed to inherit the rulership, but his asshole cousin showed up to usurp the throne, and now Harrier has to come back and unfuck everything. What we would appear to have here then is a straightforward chronological sequel. However, the next game we're going to be visiting with is going to contradict that and tell us 3D was actually a prequel. I'll put forth my thoughts on that when we actually get through that game next episode, but it's something to keep in mind as I finally wrap up my interminable introductory monologue and we get underway with Space Harrier 3D. Alright, so while we let the attract mode do a loop, I'd like to mention a bit of business that has cropped up since I recorded the intro monologue there. My web hosting company is cracking down on anything that's like big static files and doesn't really seem like part of a website by their definition, so I'm afraid I have had to yank all of my videos from skunkfuqua.com. The skeleton of the website is still there if you want to look at the acknowledgements for my patrons and such, but all of the videos are currently offline and may be that way for a while. I'm looking into possible alternatives, a new home for them maybe, but for the time being I'm afraid you're going to be stuck with what's on YouTube. I do apologize for that, I'll rectify it if I can, and if I can't, then of course I will at least continue uploading to the YouTubes here. I doubt this is going to affect a whole lot of people, I think most of my viewers do watch on the YouTubes, but I do apologize for any aggravation this causes, do pardon our dust. In the meantime, hey, there's some Space Harrier 3D going on here, and you can see right away that it does have some enhancements over the original Space Harrier's port on the Master System. It has some decoration on the horizon, we can see some buildings there and some stars in the sky. In this and other respects, Space Harrier 3D is a game of technical changes, but as I'm actually starting the game now, I want to demonstrate something real quick. It's not just shrubs this time, you can trip over any small ground object, like this flower here, but only if you're completely on the ground. If you're even a little bit off the ground and smack into it, it'll kill you. So that's kind of weird. But that's a very minor change in the grand scheme of things. Also, yes, we have TIE fighters. Anyway, as I was saying, Space Harrier 3D is a game of technical steps both forward and back. As I mentioned before, we have the skyline being decorated this time, we have some background scenery, and the screen actually scrolls up and down a little to accommodate more vertical movement as you fly up near the top of your range. And the music also may sound a little different from what you're used to on the Master System. Indeed, if you've previously played this game on a US or UK or other Western version of the Master System, it will sound different from what you remember. And that's because, whereas the first Space Harrier only supported PSG sound, Space Harrier 3D has both a PSG version of the soundtrack and an FM synth version. Now, FM synth was only included in the Japanese version of the Master System. It didn't exist on any of the exports, so unless you're playing on a Japanese system, you would never get the FM synth soundtrack, but since we're emulating this, I can get that just fine. Now, it's not always an improvement. There are some games that actually sound much better in PSG. The original Phantasy Star comes to mind, and in my opinion, Golvelius actually sounds better in PSG, so that's the way I played it. But Space Harrier 3D, again in my opinion, is an example of a game that absolutely sounds much better in FM synth. So I decided to go with that, even though it wasn't my original experience when I owned the game on my SMS. Now, no doubt you're also noticing another technical shift in Space Harrier 3D, and it's not such a good one. That is that Space Harrier 3D is very, very choppy. Very choppy. The way Harrier moves around, he moves in little fits and starts. The scaling is even less smooth than it was in SMS Space Harrier 1. I'm going to hold that thought for a moment because I'm coming up on our first boss. Our boss number 1 here is Dylos, who is a totally normal Space Harrier snake dragon type enemy. And treat him just like Squilla or Valda or anyone like that. And we will move on to stage 2, which is Mora, which has different background music. More on that in a moment. But I want to get back to the issue of this being choppy, both in terms of player movement, of enemy projectile movement, everything. Except for the checkerboard, the ground texture there. That is actually even smoother than it was before. So I don't think the problem here is entirely accommodating the 3D effect, that being something that decreases the frame rate by half, but the checkerboard still looks pretty good, so I'm thinking there are possibly other issues at play here. In any case, that is what I was referring to when I mentioned this game has a fatal flaw. It is really choppy, and that makes it genuinely harder to play, in addition to being questionable looking. Because sometimes, because the updates in enemy and enemy projectile positions are so relatively few, sometimes something will smack you in the face and kill you when you didn't even realize it was coming in your direction. So that, I think, is why this game overall doesn't come off as well as the original Space Harrier on SMS. Certainly not as good as the original arcade version. But, again, it's not all bad. I come here both to bury Space Harrier 3D and to praise it. And it does some very nice things, such as this stage having different music. I do like that this game includes both the classic Harrier Saga track, and also various other BGMs for different levels. I like the fact that different levels have sort of different color palettes and different horizon scenery. And you saw that we were also having stalactite-type obstacles coming down from the top of the screen, which you can completely avoid by staying all the way on ground level and running. Now then, we're up to our second boss, which is known as Mula. Reminds me a little of the Ida boss from Stage 2 of the original Space Harrier, because it's just some enemies rotating swiftly. And if you track their circling with your own circling, you can take them out pretty easily. One of the big differences, though, is that unlike Ida, you do not have to actually worry about the Mula robots here crashing into you. The only thing they can do is projectile you. And on we go to Stage 3, Bits. And Bits I consider a particularly good example of what Space Harrier 3D brings to the table in terms of greater variety. You know, usually you're running across these checkerboard fields, they're all clearly out in the open and desert or tropical or forest type environments, but this time we're inside what looks like a computer. This is very clearly Tron inspired. as also seen in these enemies that look sort of like little digital motorcycles that race towards you across the floor and then wheel you up into the air at you. And I think the soundtrack is also very nicely matched to the look and theme of this stage. I like Bits a lot. It's one of 2 computer-style levels in the game. The next one we won't see until the very end, but yeah, it's good stuff. And the different themes of levels usually have completely different enemy sets, and that's another thing I like about Space Harrier 3D. It is a really great game in terms of expanding on the original with a lot more variety of settings and enemies, which makes it a damn shame that it's such a bear to actually play. And on that note, I should mention something in the interest of full disclosure. I am using 2 patch codes, that is, Game Genie or Pro Action Replay style memory modifying codes, in order to do 2 things here. I'm doing it to turn off the 3D effect. It's actually possible to turn off the 3D in a hidden options menu, but that requires a little bit of fiddling around that I didn't want to be bothered with. And I am also using it to give myself unlimited lives. Reason being, Space Harrier 3D is a pretty damn tough game by Space Harrier standards, and not always for good reasons. Like I said, sometimes you get killed just because of the choppiness. In fact, a lot of the times I get killed, speaking just for myself at least, is because of the choppiness. And I'm gonna return to that thought in just a bit because we're about to hit the boss of Bits, which is Zapple. Yes, Zapple. I guess if we're in a Tron-inspired environment, this is gonna be the MCP. Anyway, you just kinda blow off Zapple's shields, as I am doing here. And then one good shot in the forehead will blow it up. And there's almost a La Mulana type move at the end there, where that jewel flies at you. That can hit and kill you, so the boss can take you down even after you've won. And we are now onto Hardega, which is very clearly a tundra kind of situation. And these trees are stopping our shots. They must be frozen very hard indeed. Anywho, though, as I was saying, yeah, Space Harrier 3D is pretty hard, and in a lot of cases when it kills me, it does so because the sprites were all kind of blending into each other in their fits and starts of animation, and I just couldn't really tell what was going on. Now, I was able to beat this with some, if not perfect, consistency back when I played it like every day on the SMS, but I'm not going to be getting that kind of level memorization back in any great hurry, because really that's what it was. I would just memorize where all the enemy waves were, and that would help keep me alive. And even then, sometimes I couldn't make it. But yeah, that was in my prime, at least as far as playing this game goes, and I am no longer in my prime. So there's pretty much no chance in hell that I'm going to beat this game without cheating a little bit, and so cheat I shall. I do want to show you the whole game after all, and I will do my best to stay alive as much as I can. I just blew them all up, but you probably noticed before. Oh, there you see it again. I do like the way those mask-type enemies kind of zoom in and out across the screen in a chevron-type pattern, approaching and retreating in perpendicular diagonal lines. This has some good enemy patterns as well. It does so many things right, it's a shame that it's just so goddamn choppy. Anyway, our next boss is Gomest, and he's pretty simple. You just have to destroy all those little hobgoblin faces around him, then you can take him down with one shot. Nothing to it. And on to Heme, which is our first volcano-type stage. The variety in this game really is wonderful. I don't want to be harder on Space Harrier 3D than it deserves. Some people in reviewing this game have complained about the fact that it's no longer always bright and cheery. There are some rather dark and oppressive looking stages, but I'm okay with that. You know, they still look good. They're still enjoyable to fly through, so I don't really have a problem with that. The only real problem I have with Space Harrier 3D is that damned animation. Now, these bouncing orb things are indestructible, and they're a real pain in the ass if you fly around, but if you just stay on the ground there and keep running, they cannot hit you at all. Man, they really make a big deal out of your deaths in this one too, don't they? Harrier's scream sounds really tortured to me in this game compared to the way it sounded in the original, both the arcade and SMS ports, and the way they have the sky flash and patented seizure visions as you crumple to the ground is pretty intense. The eyeball sphere things here are basically this game's version of Tomos, behaviorally speaking. although they can continue to move while opening up and shooting. Perhaps not as imaginative design-wise as the highly intelligent peeled grapes that were the Tomos of the original game, but they certainly look a lot better than the half-assed Space Harrier Game Gear redesign anyway. They do only open their eyes twice before flying away, so it is actually pretty damn hard this time to take out the whole wave of 3, but, well, no big deal if you don't. It's just points in the end. And though points are certainly valuable, especially in this, the hardest of the traditional Space Harriers, for keeping your lives up, well, missing 1 or 2 eyeball Tomos equivalents isn't gonna make or break you. I do kinda like the design of these ratcheting up skull things on stilts, however minor they are. I do kinda wonder how they're keeping pace with you though. Maybe they match your speed while rolling along the ground? Perspective in Space Harrier games can be weird. Anyway, never mind that. We have some bosses here who just murdered me. Our boss here is Musha, no relation to a certain excellent vertical shooter I previously covered on this channel. It seems like they should be able to hit you with that downward sword chop, but no, it just launches their fireballs. I think it would be kinda cool if you had to dodge their swords, but maybe they thought this game was hard enough already. And now we have arrived at Stage 6, being Yord, which is pretty much a palette swap of Stage 2 Mora, but it does have some different enemies floating about. And smacking my face into a pink stalagmite is probably not the most dignified way I've ever died in a video game, but such is life. And just as before, the stalactite-type obstacles coming down from the top, as long as you stay on ground level, they cannot quite hit you. I suppose this is at once a step forward and back. The stalactites are something new, but the tunnel stages are gone. There are no levels in Space Harrier 3D that have a ceiling, which is kind of a shame. Then again, this game, once again, is probably hard enough already without having to dodge bins beans and doom towers at high speeds. I'm really kind of wondering what happened with the technical drawbacks to this game. I think the 3D probably did have an effect. The frame rate reduction probably wasn't a killer, but I wonder if this game ran into, like, CPU cycle and space issues combined. Like, it has both a PSG and an FM synth version of the soundtrack. The 3D effect probably uses up some cycles and some cartridge space. I'm completely theorizing out my ass here, so take that with a grain of salt, just trying to imagine what it could have been. And our boss here of the level, Yord, is also named Yord, and I really like his design. Not all that well drawn, but to me, Yord at least looks kind of like a finless shark strapped into some kind of hover chassis and spitting fireballs at you. I don't know, I think a cybernetic hover shark's pretty badass. But Yord is pretty easy and is already dead, so time for me to move on. I've mourned, it's time to move on with my life. And now in Daemon, we get the type of level that, next to the computer levels like Bits, probably has my second favorite aesthetic in the game. I just really like that storm cloud horizon thing there with the lightning flashes that occasionally fill the clouds. Oh, those things are bastards. They have kind of a cool design, I think, in a game full of them. They look like red Oni on a jetpack, but they just pop out from behind and they start shooting so fast that usually I don't have time to react. Oh, I think those odd-looking short totem pole things with the lightning bolts, I think those are an exception to the usual rule that you can trip over any small ground object. Those I think will kill you even if you're running, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Ah! The jetpack Onis get me every time. Well, maybe not every time, but more often than not. I do like the concept, though. Again, there's a lot of cool shit in this game, it just has technical issues that impact the gameplay too much for my liking. Our boss here is Janyu, and this boss looked really cool in 3D, I have to say. The 3D effect in this game is pretty strong, Like, the Segascope glasses were already pretty impressive tech by 80s standards, but this game, I think, made even better use of it than most, no great surprise considering its perspective. And Jianyu here, he had his hands on a different 3D level than the rest of the boss sprite, so it would really look like he was reaching out toward the screen. Anywho, on we go to Manmo, which is another level much like Hardega. The palette of this is warmer than Hardega's, though, despite it being another ice stage, so, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe a sunrise or sunset effect. The enemies, by the way, may look kind of familiar there. They're based on Dogu statues, I believe is the name, from the Jomon period of prehistoric Japan, if I'm not mistaken. Also seen as Arahabaki in the Persona games. What was I talking about? Lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, if sunrise or sunset can have any meaning on an ice field, this level kind of makes me think of that. Or maybe just a semi-functional version of the Northern Lights that got stuck on yellow. I don't know. I don't think there's anything happening in this level for a little while, so just a little update on what's going on in Uncountry. I did finally finish Yakuza 5 a few days ago, and it was pretty great. I thought previously that 2 was the best in the series. This was definitely the best since 2, I would say, and it may have overtaken 2. It would be a tough, close match. But, really, really good stuff. I actually had to get my PS3 fixed to finish playing it. My PS3 died when I was pretty close to the end, and I wasn't gonna let that go. Oh, hold on, we've got a boss. This is Mechadence, which I guess is sort of like Mechanical Decadence. In any case, I'm not sure why Mechadence is this late in the game, because it's a completely standard Space Harrier snake/dragon fight. Oh well, I guess Valdo was fairly late in the original game, too. Anywho, that's gonna put us in Alphamic. And as I was saying, yeah, Yakuza 5 ended up being kind of expensive for me because I had to get my PS3 repaired in order to finish it, but I'll say it was worth it. I do like the enemy designs of these starfish things here that kind of float around until they're in a corner of the screen and then just take pot shots at you from there. Didn't enjoy that. But yeah, Yakuza 5 is, in my opinion, either the best or the second best game in the series. I still think there's pretty stiff competition from 2. Oh, we've got Idas again. And, if you've still got a PS3 kicking around and you ever liked a game in the Yakuza series, I would say definitely give it a shot. It is true to formula, so if you've never liked a Yakuza game, you won't feel any different about this one. But, you know, if it's your thing, it's more of the same, and it's particularly good more of the same. I was actually wondering if the series had done all it could do at that point, after number 4. So I wasn't really that worried as I used to be when it didn't look like it was going to be released over here. After 4, I was like, okay, maybe they're not going to bring over 5, but I don't know, I think I've done it all Yakuza-wise. But now I'm really happy that they brought over 5, and I'm wondering if we're going to get 6. So, it kind of restored my hype for the series, I suppose. At least I know we're definitely getting 0. But I suppose I should get back to talking about the game at hand, shouldn't I? Yeah, these guys remind me of the Idas. I think they can actually ram into you when they're going up the middle of the screen, which Idas could not. And these little plane guys, you'll probably want to remember them because there's a sort of interesting thing about them that'll come up in the next game. Of course, we won't get to that this episode, but if you've got a little extra space in your memory to hold on to that, please do. Oh man, I am playing like a trash fire here. It's a good thing I gave myself that unlimited lives code. But yeah, the starfish there I think are another good example of what this game kind of does creatively with the Space Harrier formula. And moving right along, our boss here is Cool Demonia, which is a pretty badass name. Unfortunately, there's nothing all that special about Cool Demonia. you have to destroy the rocks that are orbiting it, and as soon as you do that, it starts sending rocks out towards you from the middle of the screen. So you do have to be a little careful there, so that things like that don't happen. So I guess you could consider it a bit of a two-stage boss, that its attack patterns change after you've got all its defenses down. A fairly rare thing by Space Harrier standards. At any rate, we are now moving into our 10th stage, Mecha Manim, which is very similar in visual style to the first stage, Platia. We do have a few new enemies though, like these classic flying saucer-shaped UFOs, or UFOs as it is pronounced in Japanese, which always gives me a little chuckle whenever I hear it in some subtitled media or another. We do have the TIE Fighters back from Stage 1. I don't know, I don't overall agree with the criticism that Space Harrier 3D is too dark and gloomy compared to Space Harrier 1, but it would, I admit, be nice to get a few of the bright and cheerful stages that made up the entirety of the first game. I do appreciate the variety, but we do always seem to have darkened skies, or red skies, or stormy skies, or something. Not a whole lot of that Sega bright open blue. I don't think it's as big a deal in relation to this game as a lot of people seem to, but it's not entirely without merit, that particular criticism. But really, it's just kind of frustrating. 3D has so much of what I would want from a Space Harrier sequel, it's just really hamstrung by the fact that the animation and the pseudo-scaling is so... ugh. You know? I think if this had been released as an arcade game, I would have absolutely loved it, with none of the technical issues and maybe, you know, more color depth. Ah well, what might have been, what might have been. The saddest words of tongue or pen, perhaps maybe it might have been. But never mind that, we've got a boss again. And our boss this time is Almer, which is a series of rather boxy robots that descend to ground level, and as you can see, upon landing, transform into tanks. A rare case in Space Harrier 3D of a boss fight that's a bunch of minor enemies just rushing you en masse. It's just about impossible to destroy them all this time, though, because they take so many hits each to destroy. And with that, we are on to God. Oh my god. Another of the storm stages, which is fine by me, because it is one of the backdrops that I like most in this game. Kind of odd, though, that we have such a moody background, and yet we're back to the Harrier Saga theme, which is rather cheerful and optimistic sounding tune. Oh shit, what did the six fingers say to the face? It occurs to me it's probably a rather good thing that I finally got around to completing Yakuza 5, because it's just about in time for the release of Dark Souls 3, which I'm sure is going to devour a great deal of my time. I actually know very little about Dark Souls 3 at this point. I haven't been judiciously avoiding spoilers or pre-release information, but I haven't gone seeking it out either, so it's gonna be largely a mystery to me when it comes up. And I've seen some of the footage from the beta, and that's about it. Good times, good times. Oh, and I'm still going to have to finish up with my Dark Souls 2 LP after I get done with Space Harrier and Friends, which may take a little time. We've only got a few actual Space Harrier games left off, but goddamn are there going to be a lot of friends. But that's okay. I know people have been missing the older, and especially the obscure older titles from me. My Dark Souls LPs do have their fans, for which I am very grateful, but I think most of you folks out there in Viewerland are just kind of wading through them for me to get back to the old stuff. And that's understandable. I mean, there are lots of Dark Souls LPers and streamers out there, and I am far from the most skilled of them. But I do love me some Souls, and I really want to give them a little of my attention because they are very dear to me. and so I thank you for putting up with them in the meantime. Oh, and we've got a fade out, which means boss time. And the boss this time is going to be another bout with Janyu. And this is a really hard boss fight, and it's one in which the poor animation and choppy movement really kinda screws me. Because now you cannot attack Janyu at all, which is indicated by his eye being closed. What you have to do is destroy all of the eyeballs swirling around him. And while he Hadoukens at you, the eyes can also crash into you. And it just looks like they just kind of jerk around in no observable pattern, when there are still a lot of them. Now that I've destroyed some, you can kind of see that they're swirling around him in a detectable pattern, but that's really hard to see, especially at the beginning of the fight, and even when you've got them whittled down some, it's hard to track. This boss fight, as cool as Janyu looks, especially in the 3D mode, I've definitely had some game overs here. Matter of fact, I think this is where most of my attempts to beat this game end up crashing into the rocks. And I really don't think it would be nearly as hard if you could track what was going on better. Well, after you destroy all the flying eyeballs, Janyu finally opens his eye, and you can destroy him and move on to stage 12, Don't. Don't! Yeah, I think the phrase fake difficulty is grossly overused by a lot of players who just get salty when a particular part of a game gets them stuck for a while. But I really do think the second fight with Janyu is a genuine case of fake difficulty that is entirely imposed by the game's technical limitations. I do kind of like the aesthetics of this stage, because it's another volcano-style stage like Heme, and uses the same music, but it's all palette shifted toward green, so it looks almost like a sulfurous volcano or something like that. Just a little more alien than the usual set of colors and backdrops. I don't know, maybe it's me, but I like it. You know, I'm thinking, it's a game series that's not all that huge in the West, although it certainly has its die-hard fanbase. I wonder if I wouldn't like to LP some of the Yakuza games sometime. I mean, I love the series, as you can obviously tell, and there haven't been a whole lot of people doing it, I don't think. On the downside, oh my god, that would be such a time commitment. Like, Yakuza 5 is particularly big, since the games seem to get a little bigger every time. And, my stats at the end game of Yakuza 5 were 99 hours, 52% completion. That is just bananas. So yeah, that would end up being some really, really long series, especially if I got late into the series and stuff like 5. So I don't know if that's an undertaking I would really want to put on myself, or something that you would all have any interest in sitting through, but it's something I'm considering. Once again, it is a favorite series of mine. And one that needs more love, I think. It definitely doesn't get as much as it deserves outside of Japan, in my view. Anyway, our boss of stage Dote is going to be King Dote. And King Dote is a pair of fairly standard Space Harrier Dragon/Snake type enemies. A little bit like Ghidarni or Sarpedon, but instead of being conjoined, they are separated, which I suppose makes this a little bit like Haya-O. Of course, nowhere near as fast or as dangerous as Haya-O. I say just before it kills me. Actually, you know what King Dote kinda reminds me of? Those cobras that are the boss of Stage 3 in Smash TV. Well, certainly this is a little more graphically primitive, and they're not anchored to holes in the ground, but you get what I mean. And here we are on Stage 13, Meltidia. This, I believe, is going to be our final normal stage, aside from the obligatory boss rush final stage. And this one is another computer stage, much like number 3, Bits. And the Tron influence is even more obvious this time because of these Sark-looking motherfuckers, who will cheerfully ram you, as you can see. They also take a lot of shots to destroy, but on the bright side, destroying them does gain you more points than any non-boss enemy in the game, so maybe they could be considered kinda like little mini-bosses. Not sure I entirely care for the pink palette compared to the deep blue one of Bits. I also don't care for getting rammed in the face by pink light cycles. But that's life, isn't it? Sometimes you eat the bar, and sometimes you ram your face into a pink light cycle. Well, with this being stage 12, that means our final boss rush stage is going to be lucky number 13, meaning that once again we have a game with fewer levels than the original, which had 18. So once again, I do wonder if this game ran up against some cartridge size limitation issues. Then again, the levels in this game do feel a little bit longer. I don't know for sure that they are, because I didn't exactly time it with a stopwatch or anything, but it feels that way. We're probably going to be at around 45-50 minutes when this is all said and done, which is a respectable length given that the arcade version of Space Harrier could be finished within half an hour. I sure am leaving a lot of corpses on the road here. And no doubt I'm about to leave a few more because we've got some more Sark-looking motherfuckers, and... See, why did I even get hit by that? Careless and complacent, I tell you what. Now they're throwing a set of 4 at me. That's just not fair. Oh well. Good opportunity to get some points in. Might be worth an extra life or two if I didn't have that patch code activated. Which means they are eternally stuck at 3. And whatever the case, we are now finishing up with Meltadia, and our boss is gonna be Zapple again. This time it's looking a little more MCP-like, in that it has these barricades circling around it, and you have to destroy enough of them to get a shot through. Once again, I believe one shot to the forehead will do it. And there, that was actually deliberate. I wanted to show you that it could kill you with its dying animation. And we are indeed onto the boss rush. And they're going to go in the normal stage order, so the first one will of course be Dylos. The funny thing about Dylos, he actually has the only original boss theme in this game. All of the other boss music is recycled and remixed from Space Harrier 1. And only 2 enemies use that new boss theme, Dylos and the end boss. The first and last, the Alpha and Omega. Kinda weird. But anyway, enough of that, we're on to Moolah now. Moolah wasn't hard in Stage 2, and isn't hard now. Round and round we go. Zapple, we saw you not too long ago. This is your original version, though. I do kind of like that they move you into the boss's environment whenever you refight them in the boss rush. That is, the background and palette that the game would use for that boss is, or for that boss's stage, it returns during the boss rush. Just kind of a neat touch. I managed to kill Gomez in one pass on the original battle. This time it took me 2. But that's okay. We're not in a race here. Ah, Musha. Musha really was a good shooter. I miss Compile. And Yord. Again, probably my favorite boss in this game with respect to visual design. Maybe because it doesn't have a dorsal fin, it's supposed to be a lizard or something, but I don't know, I still think it looks like a flying shark in a cyber suit. And that's pretty great. There we are, we get a close-up look this time. Oh, Yord. You're too easy. You just get a slow floating back and forth pattern and a bunch of projectiles, and you deserve better, my friend. And now it is time to go another round with Janyu. And fortunately, this is the easy version of Janyu. I don't know if your shots actually do damage when the eye is closed. I never cared enough to do a careful count of the amount of shots it takes one way or the other. But that is of no importance. What's important is that we get to take another crack at Mechadents, and it's going to be just as easy this time. There is really nothing distinguishing Mechadents from Dylos, but then again, I guess that just kind of recycles the whole Squilla Valda equivalency. At least they took the trouble to make them look a little different. Cool Demonia. Yord may be the best looking, but you have the best name. Cool Demonia. I like to think those two hang out after work. Yord and Cool Demonia just kinda floating up to the bar, or riding their asteroid chariot up to the bar, as the case may be. I think Yord is a Cuba Libre drinker. Almer, on the other hand, doesn't drink at all. Not even caffeine. Almer is a Transformer straight-edger. And collectively, they form a Transformer straight-edger gang. So if you see a bunch of robot tanks rolling up to you, don't light up a cigarette or anything, you might get your ass stopped. Now this fucker. Quite difficult the first time. Quite difficult this time. I'm going to approach the sides with great caution and try not to die quite as many times to running into eyeballs, but clearly I'm gonna do a few. One thing at least that helps a bit is that when you're directly in front of Jianyu, the eyeballs never fly into your face in that range, only when you're at the left or the right side. On the other hand, when you're standing directly in front of Jianyu, you are very vulnerable to his Hadouken, so it's only so much of a benefit. Now I'm starting to have trouble even hitting the eyeballs. Not with my face, though. My face is hitting them just fine. Okay, there's one left. Gotta stay alive for the... Oh, jeez. If it's not one thing, it's another. Yep, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Space Harrier 3D is easily the most difficult of the traditional Space Harrier games. King Dolt ain't so bad, though. King Dolt is a regular pussycat. Squeaky toy, a little belly rub, and he's putty in your hands. Especially if you can pet both of them at the same time. 2 snakes, 2 hands. That's 1 down. And that's 2. And that will bring us back to Zapple. Just like the alphabet, our boss rush ends with the big Z. And there isn't anything too bad about this one. No fancy ramming gimmicks. Not even that bad in terms of projectile spam. Just knock down those barriers and that'll be all she wrote. Yeah, de-res that, Shitheimer. And that will bring us to our final battle with Dark Araya. At first, this looks like a pretty standard Space Harrier Dragon Snake type battle. Until you discover it can ram you. So you can't get right up in his face when he gets to his closest point in his cycle the way you can with Squilla or Dylos or what have you. So, if the manual is to be believed, then this is Araya's asshole cousin, who usurped the throne to which Araya was supposed to be the rightful heir. The Uncle Scar to his Simba, if you will. That makes me wonder who that demon is riding on the back of Dark Araya the way Harrier rides on regular Araya. By the way, you can run sideways into Dark Araya's other segments, so you have to wait until he turns all the way around and gets out of the way before you try to go over there and get more shots in. Otherwise, you will get rammed by the tail segments. It doesn't have to head on you to kill you. And we are victorious once again. Hey, there's the good prince. Araya's face looks really happy in this game. Well, I suppose I'd be happy too if I had been trapped in some giant space samurai bubble and someone had finally come along to rescue me. After a long and dangerous battle deep in the land of the dragons, you, Space Harrier, have defeated the evil prince, Araya's half-brother, and saved the true dragon Prince Araya from the electromagnetic wave that was his prison. In response to your bravery, the magnificent white dragon, now king of the dragons, pledged you his undying gratitude and friendship. With peace restored to the land of the dragons, Araya and you soared off into the skies, searching out new challenges in the land of the dragons. Thus ends the Battle of Space Harrier 3D. The end. So you probably noticed that the ending text there used the alternate Urea romanization, which strikes me as rather wacky given that just a few minutes ago it had used the standard spelling for Dark Araya. Ah well, I guess that'll happen with translations. And we are finally hearing the Battlefield music track, which was used in the previous game when Harrier and Araya would team up for the bonus stages and go plowing through various bits of plant life and architecture. I guess that's appropriate considering Harrier and Araya have finally been reunited. Now, you will no doubt recall that the manual and the back of the box were pretty explicit about this being a chronological sequel that took place after the original game, but notice that the game text itself is not explicit about that. It's ambiguous, could go either way. Now, I like to think that, since it mentions Harrier winning Araya's undying friendship, and that they're going off to seek new adventures together, I think that phrasing actually kind of supports the next game's assertion that it's a prequel. But we'll cross that bridge again when we get to it. In the meantime, I'm just happy to have received another present from Sega, and it's not even Christmas. Now here on the high score screen, you can use controller 2 to enter the word level to change the difficulty, which just changes how many lives you get, or 3 to turn the 3D on or off, or sound to get into this sound test. Now remember in the original game how you could enter a code to get a hidden option screen, which was 7437481? I'm gonna try that again here. Hello, this is ZHG 97591. Good fortune does not always repeat itself. Oh, Sega, you wacky funsters. Well, I suppose that's all there is to be done in the sound test then, so why don't you play us out, FM Synth version of White Summer? Not bad at all. Though, near as I can tell, the track is never actually used in the game, and the only way to access it is through this sound test. Well, regardless, that's it for Space Harrier 3D. I really want to like this game more than I do. It's so close to being a great sequel, or prequel as the case may be, but due to that jumpiness in the animation and faux scaling, so far away. So close, yet so far away. There's a restless look in your eye tonight. Anyway, 3D has more visual themes, more music, more enemies, more of everything except stages, and the amount of variety really is awesome. And it's just tragic that all of that creativity gets shat on by the game engine. Maybe I'm making a bigger deal of that than others might, but in my book it really does impact the gameplay quite a bit, and adds a lot of difficulty that isn't an organic, good kind of difficulty, but a bad difficulty that consists of you fighting against the refresh rate to keep track of where everything is and where it's going. So for me, this one's right up there with Panzer Dragoon Saga as a game that would really benefit from an HD remake on hardware that doesn't hold back the director's vision, but who would ever make that? Ah well. It was a good try, Sega, and the 3D effect really was lovely. I wish I could show it to you all out there in viewerland, but this will have to do. Thank you all very much for watching, and please join me next time for Space Harrier's debut on the Genesis, and the final traditional Space Harrier game. This is signing off. Today's episode of Space Harrier and Friends has been brought to you by Justin Carpenter, Nolden, Zangamarth, Charlie Dunst, Anonymous Benefactor, John Madigan, Johnny Millennium, Sanguine Games, Misha Van Doren, Craig Patterson, Frank Rizzi, Tim J., Lolo DePuzlo, Joshua C. Ritchie, Jared C. Rice, Darren Chow, Sonic Rose, EX Potemkin, Alicia Goranson, Argyle Jelly, Mick Azaris, DG Jono, Doug Russell, August Fortnight, and all of my very generous patrons. Thank you all for watching, for commenting and subscribing as appropriate. Have a great week, folks, and I'll see you again real soon.